Welcome to Computer Tech and More. Today I got a good one for you. We're going to be doing the final roundup for all the fans I've tested, as seen in this picture, or actually video, and see which one's the top performer worth buying and which ones you should probably skip. I'm going to be doing more fans in the future. If you want to let me know which fan you're interested in, please leave a comment down below. Alright, let's get into some of the graphs and the data. So here we are in my massive roundup video with all the fans that I tested all on one graphs. Here in this first chart, we're looking at noise normalized airspeed through an air cooler. All fans have been set to the same dB level of 42 decibels in my tests. The best fan through an air cooler is easily the Silent Wings 4 Pro 120 millimeter size fan. It ran at 1,535 RPM and has an airspeed of 1.15, a truly impressive result. The next best fan is the Noctua design NF A12X25, which ran at 1,340 RPM and moved 1 meter per second of air. The fractal design GP14 was spun at 1,175 RPM and moved 0.95 meters per second of air. So those are the top picks. The worst performer here was the Noctua NF F12, which is right here. It only moved 0.35 meters per second of air. That was very surprising to me, considering that it's a pressure optimized fan in my thicker CPU cooler. I thought it would perform pretty well on. And the lian-li SL Infinity 120 did particularly bad with only moving 0.45 meters per second of air. At 100% fan speed, both Silent Wing 4 Pros are the top performers on this chart. The 120mm one in first place, the 140mm in second place. The 120 had an RPM of 2,830 and move the air at 2.4 meters per second. The Pro 4 140 had an RPM of 2,436, had an airspeed of 2.06 meters per second. The Noctua A12X25 had pretty standard results of 1.75, which tied with the lian-li SL Infinity 120, both of them moving 1.75 meters per second of air. Next up is noise normalized airspeed versus distance from my computer case simulation. In these next graphs, we will see how the fans lose their airspeed across the length of a case. This indicates how focused or able to fill a case the fans are. In short, basically how well the fan pushes air through a case. Here, lines shifted to the top are better, with the top three fans at 6 and 9 inches being the Silent Wings 4 Pro 120 and the Fractal Design X2 GP14, and in third place, Silent Wings 4 Pro 140mm size fan. I am ignoring the results for the Cougar CF V12, so the two fans, as it is no longer available. At 11 and 14 inches, the top fans switch places a little bit, with the top performer being the Silent Wings 4 Pro 140mm size fan. And in second place, the X2 GP18, the Fractal Design 180mm size fan, in second place. The bottom performers here is the lian-li SL Infinity 120. It just underperforms significantly at most distances, with the only one worse being the NF F12 at the very beginning, at the 6-inch mark from the fan. At 100% airspeed, the Silent Wings 4 Pro 140mm size fan is overall the best fan, with only the X2 GP18 outperforming it at 14 inches. So the farthest distance from the fan. The number 2 slot goes to the Silent Wings 4 Pro 120mm size fan. with the, which one is this? The X2 GP18 coming in third until the very back of the case where it comes in first place. The Noctua NF812X25 loses a lot of ground at 100% RPM speeds compared to other fans. On the right side of the graph are the RPMs with each fan as well as their noise rating. So the X15 had 54 decibels, the Noctua X25 52. So you can see the RPM and the decibel reading for each fan. So the Silent Wings 4 had an impressive RPM at the 100% fan speed, but it was also rip-roaring loud, 61.5 decibels in my readings. With it being one of the noisiest fans, the only fan being noisier is the 180mm size fan. So once you take noise into consideration, I would say that the Silent Wings 4 Pro 120mm size fan is actually the top pick here, with the bottom performer being the NF-F12 from Noctua. I added a bonus graph here. I figured that 9 inches from the fan was a reasonable distance to want a fan to push air as a standard fan test. And it just makes it easier to read the data than lines on a graph. So looking at it right here, you can see which fans are the top performers, noise normalized. The X2 GP14 moved 1.45 meters per second of air, with the 120mm Silent Wings 4 Pro at having an airspeed of 1.4, and the 4 Pro 140 having an airspeed of 1.3. These are just the top 3 fans. The Noctua NF-A12X25 had a relatively impressive compared to the other fans at 1 meter per second, but it just does not match the other fans, noise normalized at 9 inches. At 100% air fan speed, not airspeed, we see the results shift a little bit, with the Silent Wings 4 Pro 140 taking the first spot with a airspeed of 3.1, the 4 Pro 120 an airspeed of 2.7, and the Fractal Design X2 GP14 with an airspeed of 2.3. It's just larger diameter, is able to push more air. The X25 and X15 were fairly impressive compared to the other 120mm size fans, but they just trailed behind the other fans. Up is CFM testing. Even though they are all the same on the same graph, the 120 and 140mm size fans are not directly comparable because the tubes used for testing them are different sizes. So I grouped the appropriate sizes together. So first up is noise normalized testing. For 140mm size fans, the Silent Wings Pro 4 is the best, just moving the most amount of air, high CFM, with a cubic feet per minute rating of 61.84 and an RPM of 950. The Fractal Design GP14 achieved 57.98 cubic feet per minute with an RPM of 1,175. Whew. Moving down to 120mm size fans, the Silent Wings 4 Pro 120 is our top performer. It just basically blows everything else out of the water. Its RPM is 1,535 with a CFM of 53.25. The Noctua Design, or did I say Noctua Design? Noctua NF-A12X25 has an RPM of 1,340 and it moved 49.82 cubic feet per minute of air. So again, the discontinued Cougar CF V12HP ran at 1,110 RPM with a cubic feet per minute of 53.25. It was truly an impressive fan in noise normalized testing. But again, we're ignoring it because it's no longer available. 100% fan speeds, the situation is basically the same. The Silent Wings 4 Pro 140 is just the best fan. It moved 150 cubic feet per minute of air, which just completely blows the X2 GP14 from Fractal Design out of the water because it just cannot match its RPM. When we take a look at the 120 millimeter size fan, we can see that the situation is very similar. The Silent Wings 4 Pro 120 is our top performer, moving 97.9 CFM of air. The lian-li SL Infinity 120 moved 82.5 CFM of air. The Noctua is closely behind it. The Noctua A12X25 moved 72.1 CFM of air. So in a little bit of a explanation here. This 100% RPM needs to be taken with a grain of salt. If you're running your fans at 100% RPM, something has gone terribly wrong with your PC and it's just trying to flush all the heat out of it. So you don't need that much air for your case fans. So take all this with a grain of salt. If you're just if your system is all of a sudden overheating and it just needs to try to cool down as quickly as possible, then it kind of makes sense. Otherwise, you really want to focus more on this noise normalized test. And here you want basically the best performance for as little noise as possible. So you're really looking at like over here. And if you only have room for a slim one, well, then you've put yourself into that category. Anyways, I just wanted to give that brief explanation here. Alrighty then. Last, but certainly not least, is fan noise versus RPM. By far, the worst fan on this graph is the Fractal Design X2GP18 in my testing. It just is far noisier at pretty much every RPM, than the other fans, with the Noctua NF F12 coming up next. There are some impressive notable notes. The Silent Wings 4 Pro 120, side note there, the behavior of the non-Pro should be identical within the RPM limits for the non-Pro variants. So at like 1000 RPM versus 1000 RPM, non-Pro versus Pro should be basically identical. So just as a comparative level. But anyways, the Pro 4 120 performed very well in my noise testing until it hit higher RPMs. And the Noctua A12X25 was basically the second best. It actually had lower noise levels at lower RPMs, but as the RPMs started to increase, they started to become more and more similar. The Fractal Design X2GP14 was also an impressive notable note for a larger 140mm size fan that I would actually recommend as a case fan. So now where does this leave us? Let's go to my conclusion. So conclusion, after testing all of these fans, and I'm sorry I didn't include in the picture the Fractal Design ones, they're just back installed into the case and I didn't want to pull them out again. And getting all these fans situated for the camera was a real challenge. But where do all these fans stack up and which ones would I recommend from what I've tested out of these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8? In noise normalized testing, the number one top performer was the Be Quiet Silent Wings Pro 4 120mm size fan. It just performed the best, hands down. The number 2 ranked fan was the Noctua NF AX25. And I chose the decibel reading for the noise normalized testing for the Noctua's around 1100 RPM, which is when I had an AIO in my old system, I found that to be where this one was barely audible. So I chose that as that criteria mark. So the number 2 or number 3 after the Noctua here was the stock fan from Fractal Design, the X2GP14 fan. It's the number 3 rated fan, with number 4 being the Cougar right here. At 100% RPMs, the situation is more or less the same, with the Silent Wings 4 140 gaining some ground through the air cooler at noise levels. The Silent Wings was among the quietest, as well as the NF AX25 were among the quietest, but really the only one that I found really noisy were the F12 from Noctua and the stock 180mm fan from Fractal Design in the torrent case. The rest of them are just kind of middle of the pack. So for air cooling the case, the best fans for air cooling the case were the Be Quiet 120mm size, the Silent Wings 4, and the 140mm from Fractal Design, with a little bit later down being the 180mm size from Fractal Design, and then followed by the Noctua. In terms of 100% raw performance, the number one was the Silent Wings 120, followed by the 180mm fan, followed closely by the Silent Wings 4 Pro 140, and then the next one after that is the 140mm size from Fractal Design. Those are just the top performers there. So with all that said, a few trends that I wanted to comment on. None of the trends are surprising, but I want to talk about them nonetheless. Larger fans are better at moving and maintaining higher air velocity as you reach towards the back of the case, which is why the Be Quiet 140 tends to do really well as a case fan. So as a general recommendation, I would choose 140mm fans over 120s, but if you have a choice between two 120s or one 140, two 120s are going to do a better job. If you have a choice between two 140s and two 120s, the 140s are generally going to do better. And you have a choice between three 120s and two 140s, it doesn't really matter. It's going to equal out more or less the same. With my testing, I'm primarily interested in pure performance, not really the fan aesthetic. That comes second. In this first round, I only have one RGB fan. So if you are only interested in RGB, you already know which one you're going to be getting. Now that all that is out of the way, I really would not recommend the lian-li SL Infinity 120s as case fans, like at all. It appears to spread out the airflow so it doesn't punch through the case. For heatsink testing at noise normalized 42 decibels in my testing methodology, it was adequate. It wasn't great, it wasn't bad, it was adequate. At its maximum RPM, it was in the middle of the pack. It didn't have a radiator, so I can't really comment on that. On how much, since I don't have a radiator, I really can't comment on how well it'll do against the tighter spacing where it takes more force to push through a radiator in an obstructed path. It also is relatively noisy at all RPMs in my testing, so I only recommend it if you really love RPM and its special connection feature. But more fans are starting to feature a unified type clip, and I do plan on testing those. So, what is the best case fan? In noise normalized testing, the Noctua NF-AX25 is in my top 3. The stock fans in the Torrent, the X2 GP14s are great, but in best, first place is the Silent Wings 4 Pro. Maintains the best airflow across all distances from the fan, meaning it'll push through the case the best. At maximum speeds, the Noctua NF-AX25 does drop in position as it does not have the same maximum RPM. Here the Be Quiet Silent Wings 4 Pro 4s, both the 120 and 140, are really the best. Basically, I would say all you really need is a Noctua NF-A12X25 in performance, but if you are in a hot environment or you really need to push a lot of hot air out of your system, the Silent Wing 4 Pros will do it. They will do the best. As for the fin stack cooling through my fan heatsink, the best is, again, the SilentWing 4 Pro 120mm size with the NF-AX25 and second in Norse normalized testing. Before I comment on max RPM, it is possible to move air fast enough through a heatsink or fin stack radiator that literally no more heat can be removed, so the max speed doesn't actually help. In other words, it can't remove heat fast enough for the extra airflow to really matter. But the fan that can move the most air through the fin stack is the SilentWing 4 Pro, right here, followed by the 140mm version, then the Noctua AX or A12X25, and then finally the lian-li SL Infinity 120. So, all of that being said, what is the best fan? Currently on the market, I would have to say the SilentWing 4 Pro, or at least SilentWing 4, is the best. Depending on your needs, either get the Pro or non-Pro variants of this fan. For radiators and heat sinks, I would go Pro, just so you have that extra overhead to push more air if needed to cool down that piece or component as quickly as possible when it needs to be done. As I did not test the non-Pro variant specifically, but they have the same blade design and are only limited in the motor, how fast in RPM they can spin. So using my data, you can actually see how it would compare to other fans. So actually comparing it to the Noctua NF-AX25, the non-Pro versus the non-Pro of this outperforms the Noctua by a little bit because of where that RPM spacing is. So again, as a general recommendation, the Be Quiet SilentWing 4 is my top pick fan for what I've tested thus far. And whether you need a case fan, a radiator fan, for radiators and heatsinks, I would get the Pro. For case fans, I would get the regular or the high speed. As a note, only the Pro comes with these what do I call it, brackets on the edges that really make it what it would excel at for radiators, where these can slide off. And then they would have the other bracket for case fan design. The other ones don't have the pressure optimized. But there we go. I plan to do more fan testing in the future. Please subscribe for more content, and down below list any other fans you'd like me to take a look at, and I'll try to get a hold of them to do some testing. Thank you very much, and have a great day.